To get started on this exercise, you should have downloaded the Cubist Silhouette Exercise folder, and inside of this folder, you'll find a set of silhouettes that we're going to use for this exercise composition. So to get started, let's jump into Adobe Illustrator and create a document that's got 3 different artboards. We'll go up to File, down to New. As far as the size of this document, each of our artboards needs to be 16 by 16 inches square. Do make sure you're working in inches. Set your number of artboards to be 3. We can call this our Cubist Silhouettes. We won't need to bother with bleeds, and under the advanced settings, do make sure you're working in RGB color mode. Now, in order to make sure our artboards are side by side when we set it up, click on More Settings. And under the More Settings, you can see how we have 3 artboards. Choose the one that has the arrow pointing to the right. This will arrange them in a row, side by side, all moving to the right. Also, you can set your spacing to be a little bit larger. I like to keep mine about 1 inch. When we say Create Document, this will create our document with the 3 artboards nice and set up to place in for our composition. Now for this exercise, we're going to be creating 3 different compositions. So we want to put one composition inside of each of the artboards that we have established. Let's work on this first one on the far left-hand side first. Before we begin, let's open up those different silhouettes as well. So let's go to File, down to Open. Locate the Silhouette Figures Illustrator file and choose Open. Remember, this will open up in its own separate Illustrator document. So choose your black arrow selection tool, click and drag over all of them, then go up to Edit and Copy. Choose our original document, and I'm going to go off my artboard and go up to Edit and Paste. And this will paste it off into the gray area. Now, all of our compositions are also going to be inside of a circular area. So now let's choose our ellipse tool. Set your fill color to be white and your stroke color to be black. You can click on the little default fill and stroke to quickly and easily do that. When you click once inside of the artboard area, this will allow you to type in the exact ellipse size that we want it to be. In our case, we want it to be 15 by 15 inches. When we say OK, this will create our circle, and then we may need to choose our selection tool to place it right nice in the middle of our composition. Now the first thing we'll do for each of the compositions is to choose a variety of different silhouettes to use within our circle. Here's a good tip to keep in mind. You don't want to use so many silhouettes that it creates too many complex shapes. But you don't want to use too few so that it looks too boring or not detailed enough. So I'm going to recommend using between 3 and 5 of the silhouettes. So as you choose them, click and drag them on. We may need to bring them to the front so we can see it. And then you can change up their size, position, and orientation to fill up the entire area. Also, if part of your silhouettes go off of the circle, that's okay too. We'll clean it up later. The final thing to know is to have some of your silhouettes overlapping one another. Having this little bit of overlap is a great way of adding some visual interest into your composition. So as I click and drag on some of these, we'll scale them up, create a little different composition. Also, if you want to see how they're going to overlap, as you select each of the characters, we'll select all 3 of mine. If you'll set their fill color to be none and their stroke color to be black, this will give you an idea of how they're overlapping and what their shapes will look like within their composition. So take a minute now and create your own little composition within this area. Once you get something that you like, now let's go in and further refine the details. For this first illustration, I want you to use the line segment tool to slice up your entire circular composition. The line segment tool can be found at the top of your toolbox. We're going to set our fill color to be none and our stroke color to be black. Click and drag through your circular area and create a series of lines that dissect and cut your entire composition. Now, just like with the silhouettes, we don't want to use too many lines to create too much different shapes, too much complexity to your design. But we also don't want to use too few lines so that it doesn't look interesting enough. So as you click and drag, pay attention to its overall compositional effect until you get the results that you like. Another thing to keep in mind is that we don't want to click and drag inside of the circle. I want all of your lines to go from beyond the circle, from one edge to the other. Once you get something that you like, you can back out and deselect it to see what it looks like. Again, it's okay if it goes beyond the circle. The next thing we're going to do is to clean up all of the edges. In order to do that, with your selection tool, click and drag over the entire area, and let's open up our Pathfinder panel. If you don't see it off to the side, you can go up to Window and choose Pathfinder. I can see I've got mine off on the left-hand side, the right-hand side. With Pathfinder, this allows you to take all of your different vector paths and choose to interact them in some unique way. In our case, we want to choose the Divide Pathfinder at the very bottom left-hand corner. With one click, it looks like not much has happened. It's got rid of some of the lines around the edges, and it's also grouped everything together. So let's go up to Object and choose Ungroup. Now with their ungrouped, you can click on each individual slice and be able to move it out because now it's its own separate individual piece. But we don't want to move them, we'll keep them all in place. Instead, we want to be able to select some of the other little pieces that need to be erased away. So in my case, this arm needs to go away, and any other parts that are sticking out beyond our circular composition. Now when you do this, you may find that you need to use your selection tool, or your white arrow direct selection tool to get some of the smaller pieces. But once you've got all of the pieces around the edge selected and deleted away, now we can focus on colorizing your artwork. Before we colorize, let's choose our selection tool and click and drag over the entire composition again. With it all selected, let's set the fill color for everything to be white and the stroke color to be none. This will have everything set as its own individual white pieces. Do know that if you accidentally click off of it, it looks like it's all gone, but it's actually just deselected. You can always click and drag again to reselect your working area. Now to colorize this, we don't just want to choose any random colors. I want each of your compositions to have its own unique color harmony. So to choose these color harmonies, let's go to our Swatches panel, and at the very bottom left-hand corner, choose your Swatch Libraries menu. This has a variety of different pre-made color swatches, and you may use any of the color harmonies that you wish, as long as it's not a pattern, as long as it's not a gradient, or any of these predefined color books. We're only wanting to use some of the solid, flat color schemes within each of your compositions, and I want each one to be something slightly different. So for instance, if I go to Color Properties, and I chose the bright colors. This will open up its own individual palette, and you can see all of these color swatches are automatically chosen to be bright, vibrant colors. Some of the other color palettes that you can open up would be your dark colors or your saturated and desaturated colors. Any one of these could easily be used as part of your own compositional color scheme, as long as it's not a gradient or a pattern or any of the predefined entire color books. That's okay to work with. So with my brights selected, I want to drag them over here. Now let's jump in and start filling in each individual part. The tool to do this is going to be our Live Paint Bucket tool. If you don't see it, it could be hiding underneath your Shape Builder tool. With the Live Paint Bucket tool selected, make sure your Fill Color Swatch is on top of your Stroke Color Swatch here, because now whenever I click inside of my brights, it should fill that in as the fill color. Clicking whatever color you want, you can hover over your artwork, click once, and it will fill in that particular area. Take some time now to fill in your entire composition, choosing different colors for each area until the entire thing is nice and filled in with all of the different parts that you have. You can have some of the same colors side by side if you wish, but in general you should have a good variety of different colors. Another good tip to know is that if you want to have good contrast between your characters and the background, let your characters be lighter and your background be darker. That light and dark difference is what will make your characters really pop out. A final tip to know is if you hit Command H on your keyboard, this will hide your selection and show you what your artwork looks like without seeing the vector edges. Now it's still selected, so you can do Command H again, and that will bring back your composition. I'm going to pause the video now and colorize my entire color scheme and then come back to it and continue on. Alright, now that we're done, this should give you a good idea of what your overall color composition should look like once everything is filled in. In my case, you can see how all of my background colors have a similar color or tone to them, and all of my figure colors or foreground colors also have a similar color or tone within them. However, feel free to play around with this and do whatever you wish for your composition. Part of the fun of this Cubist style is simply playing around with how the colors interact with each other as they overlap. The final thing we'll do is to select our area and then choose the expand at the very top in your control panel. This will break it apart into its individual vector pieces that we can pick and choose from. Now that we've got one composition done, let's go back to our layers panel. Let's lock down layer 1 and create a layer 2 to place a second composition on. For this second layer, we may need to return to our silhouette figures and copy them and paste them into this layer, again putting them off of your artboard onto this bottom part. Now for this one, we want to set it up exactly the same way as we've done the previous compositions. Starting off with a circle that's 15 inches by 15 inches, so click once. We'll move that circle into place. We'll then pick and choose several different silhouettes, scale them up, and make a composition from those silhouettes. Once the silhouettes are done, we want to add further details to this, just like we did with the lines, except on this second composition, I want you to use just circles and ellipses. So in this case, we're going to choose our ellipse tool, set your fill and stroke to be none, and then draw off a variety of different circular shapes that overlap and bisect and dissect your your circle for this composition, in addition to having a variety of different silhouettes as a part of this. I'm going to pause my video and load up my composition that I've already done. Alrighty, so here you see I've got my silhouette figures and I've got all of my different circles bisecting and intersecting my circle that I have. As with our first one, we want to select the entire area and let's divide this up and then clean up the outer edges. So with everything selected, let's go to our Pathfinder panel, choose the divide option. Once it's divided, let's go up to Object and ungroup it. Now that it's ungrouped, we should be able to deselect and start clicking on everything that's on the outer edge and erase it away. So selecting all of these extra little bits that's on this outer particular part. All right, once the outer part is all completed, now we can go in and start colorizing it the way we did before. So click and drag over your entire area. Before we colorize, set your fill color to be none and your stroke color, set your fill color to be white, and your stroke color to be none. With it still selected, let's go through and see if we can choose a different kind of color theme to work in. I'm going to open up my libraries. In this case, maybe I'll choose something like my earth tones or my skin tones. Let's choose some, got some nice neutrals. Within these neutrals, I'll make sure my fill color swatch is on top, choose your live paint bucket tool, Then start to pick and choose the different colors to fill in the particular areas. I'm going to pause my video now and complete out finishing up the overall composition. Alrighty, now that I've got everything nice and colorized, I've got my figures selected. Let's go up to Expand and break it apart, and we can view our composition together. Seeing them side by side, you can see how drastically different the two different color schemes tend to work, but it adds a nice little effect for both of them. Now let's go and do the final one. Going back to Layers, let's lock down Layer 2, create a new Layer 3 for our third composition. And as with the other ones, let's choose our silhouette figures. We'll copy these and paste them off to the side. Then pick and choose and create a circular composition. So let's choose our circular tool, ellipse tool. Set your fill and stroke to be a white fill and a black stroke. We want to create an ellipse that's 15 by 15. Right in the center of our document. Again, find a variety of different silhouettes and place those silhouettes into your circular composition so that you can build out what you like. Now for this final one, rather than using straight lines or ellipses, I want you to use your own free-form drawn lines using the pencil tool. So with this, the tool we're going to use is going to be, let's see if I can zoom into it, our pencil tool. The pencil tool may be hiding underneath the shaper tool. And I'm going to double click the pencil tool to open up the pencil options. Let's set the fidelity to be very smooth, so drag that all the way off to the right-hand side. When we say OK, this will allow you to click and drag through your circle. We'll set our fill color to be none and our stroke color to be black. This way it will also draw off a nice black line. Now when we click and draw through it, we can draw a variety of different curved lines, looping lines, or whatever kind of lines that you want for your composition. As with the other ones, we don't want to have so many lines that it becomes too complex, but we also don't want to have too few so that it's not interesting to work in. Playing around with the lines and also the shape and composition of your different silhouettes, create a composition that you like and want to work within. I'm going to pause my video here and let's add in the composition that I have. All right, now that I've got my composition created, again, using a variety of different pencil drawn lines, as with the other ones, we need to clean up our shape. So let's click and drag over everything. We'll open up our Pathfinder tool and choose Divide. Once it's divided, make sure to go up to Object and ungroup it. And then we can go through and select all of the different lines and parts that are outside of our circular area. Carefully selecting those and then just deleting them away until everything is gone and nice and cleaned up. There we go. Now that it's cleaned up, let's select our entire composition again and start to fill in the different parts of it. With it selected, let's make sure our fill color is set to white, our stroke color is set to none. We'll go to our swatches panel and let's open up another different set of colors to work in. In my case, I'm going to choose the color properties of being cool colors. Within these cool colors, we'll choose our Live Paint Bucket tool. Make sure your fill colors swatch is set to the top, and start to pick and choose different colors to colorize the artwork that you have. As with the other ones, I'm going to go ahead and pause this for the sake of time and load up my finished composition. And here you see we've got our final composition. We can return to the other layers and let's unlock everything. We'll zoom back out and see our final composition for all three of these. Also at this time, you can erase away any of the unnecessary silhouettes that we didn't use so that only left with our three different color compositions. For the final part of this, we want to add the finishing details using Photoshop and a variety of different selection tools and some of the fun blending techniques that will add some shadows and other little textures and compositions within each of the individual shapes. At this time, we'll go up to File and Save. And if you haven't done so, save it up as Cubist Silhouettes Illustrator file. We'll hit Save, and we'll say OK to all of the basic options. Now to bring this into Photoshop, let's jump into Photoshop and create a new document. Go up to File and New. The size of this document needs to be the same size as the other ones, so make sure you're working in inches. Set your size to be 16 by 16 inches with a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. Also, let's make sure we're working in RGB color mode, and our background color will be set to white. We can say Create. Now we can return to our Illustrator document, and we'll copy and paste over one at a time each one of these. Let's work on this final one as my first one. So select it, Command-C to copy, jump back into Photoshop, and paste. Now when you paste something from Illustrator into Photoshop, it's going to ask you what way do you want to bring this vector file into a rasterized environment. In our case, we're going to choose pixels and say OK. It'll ask you to lock in any kind of transformations, so we're just going to hit the check at the top, and you'll notice it has its own particular layer. What we want to do in Photoshop is to add a stylized kind of drop shadow inside of a few of these individual shaped areas. To do this, we're going to use our gradients and also a filter from our filter gallery. So let's go down to our Layers panel and create a layer on top of layer 1, creating a new one. You really don't have to give it a name. As long as it's blank and transparent, that's what we're looking for. Now to select the individual shapes, we're going to be using our Magic Wand tool. If you don't see it, it could be hiding underneath your Quick Selection tool. With the Magic Wand tool selected, make sure you're working in normal mode with a tolerance of about 5 to 10, and make sure Contiguous and Sample All Layers is checked on. With those selected and your layer at the very top selected, you can now click inside of an area. Let's say I'll do this blue area right here, and notice that it quickly and easily chooses just that particular color. With that color selected, let's choose our gradient tool. If you don't see it, it could be hiding underneath your paint bucket. With the gradient selected, let's go to the very top and choose the style of foreground to white. So we want to choose this first one. Right now it's going foreground to background, so we need to set our background color to be white. So clicking on this background color swatch, choose white from your color picker and say OK. Now, whenever I hold down the Option key, I get a little color picker, and I can easily and quickly pick up any color that I want. If I was to click and drag, let's say I want to choose, let's go with this purple. If I was to click and drag, notice that this is the gradient that it creates. When we do this, we want it to blend in with everything below it. So let's return to our layer and change the blending mode to multiply. Now it looks like it's adding that drop shadow. As long as my foreground color is something darker than the color that I have selected or that I'm painting on top of, that'll add that particular effect. I'll do Command-D and deselect. Let's re-choose our Magic Wand tool and choose another like color area. So maybe I'll choose this one, grab our gradient tool and click and drag and create a gradient from here. Let's do one more with this area. I'll do this blue area up here. Grab my gradient tool now, click and drag, and add that gradient. Now you may be wondering, you could have done this all in Illustrator, but what we want to do in Photoshop is add a filter to the area that we have selected. Notice that layer 2 are the gradients that we have created. If we go up to Filter, go down to the Filter Gallery, and locate the Color Halftone or the Halftone Patterns section. I'm going to zoom out so we can see all of those. I've already got mine selected, but you can find the halftone under Sketch, and then choose Halftone Pattern right here. Under the options, you can change up the contrast of it. We want to set our contrast to be very high, so all the way up to 50. And then you can choose a pattern type and the size of that pattern. Right now I have circle selected. Usually by default it's set to dots. And when you change the size of it, you can see those dots will get larger or smaller based on whatever you have selected. When we say OK, this will add a funky little color pattern to the area that we have, or to the layer that we had selected. Let's create a new layer now and repeat this process. Again, grab your Magic Wand tool, select a couple of areas one at a time, grab your gradient. In this case, I want to hold down my Option key and choose another color, then click and drag. And remember, we need to change our layer's blending mode to multiply so that we can see the effect take place. If you don't like the color that you have, you can always pick another color. Hold down Option. Maybe for this one I want it to be a little bit more of a purple. That one looks good. Swap back over to my Magic Wand tool, click on another area, swap over to my Gradient tool, and click and drag and create it. You don't have to do this to every single piece, but doing it to several of them will add kind of an interesting effect to an otherwise flat and boring design. Once we've got it selected and done, with our layer selected, we'll go up to Filter, back down to the Filter Gallery. This time, instead of using, say, the dot pattern, I'll use something like the circle or the line pattern. Again, we can change up the size, say OK. Now that pattern has been added to my overall design. Repeat this process until you feel like you've got a good composition for your overall circle. Once you're finished, save it as a Photoshop file. File and Save As. We want to do this for each of the 3 different compositions that we have. So repeat this process for the other 2 compositions, adding the drop shadow little filter to it. For this one, I'll call this my silhouette. Excuse me, this should be our Cubist silhouette. And this will be composition number 1. We'll do Save. These Photoshop files are what you'll upload to Moodle once you're finished.